They said I wasn't strong enough, that I wasn't business-minded like my brothers, that I didn't belong at the table my grandfather built. But I kept receipts, not of what I bought, but of what they lost. And when my assistant walked into that room, they didn't realize the empire was already mine. This is not a story of revenge, not exactly. It's the story of a woman they tried to erase, and the fortune she protected in silence. It started like every other quarterly family meeting. Big mahogany table, crystal water glasses, my brothers flexing their latest quote-unquote ventures, trying to out-impress each other like schoolboys. They spoke of hedge funds, app launches, and offshore expansions, the kind of bravado that fills empty rooms. They laughed when I entered. Oh, she brought her assistant again. Cute. I wasn't surprised. Their minds had always been small when it came to seeing beyond noise. I walked in with Lena at my side, clipboard in hand, silence on her lips, brilliance in her eyes. When our father fell ill, they assumed I'd fall in line, silent, compliant. They made decisions behind closed doors, held meetings without me. I wasn't even CC'd on emails. But I watched, and I waited. They handed me a small folder. Here's your summary, my oldest brother smirked, sliding it across the polished wood. I didn't open it, because I already knew what was in it. Misreported numbers, bloated expense sheets, projects that had failed quietly but were dressed up in buzzwords. I cleared my throat. These figures are outdated, I began. He interrupted me, raising a hand like a teacher scolding a child. You can go now. Thanks for coming. I stood there for a moment. I looked at each of them, every smug expression, every false sense of superiority. And I didn't leave, not yet, because they had no idea who I had become. My brothers always viewed business as conquest, loud, immediate, and public. For them, power was a title, a corner office, a press release. But I had learned to see it differently. Power was what happened in silence, the moves made when no one was looking, the resilience forged when all eyes had turned away. I sat down instead of leaving. It rattled them more than any words could. I'm not finished, I said, my voice low. They exchanged glances, uncomfortable now. My oldest brother leaned back in his chair like a cartoon villain who had just underestimated the protagonist. He didn't know it yet, but the plot had already turned. The charity division you assigned me to last year, still playing social worker, are we? Daniel interrupted with a smirk. I ignored him. Has grown 213% in net yield. That made one of them sit up. What? Brian asked, the first sign of actual curiosity. While you've been burning through investor capital on vanity apps and private jets, I've been building partnerships that make actual money, ethical money, sustainable, international, scalable partnerships. Daniel scoffed. That's not real business. Really? Because the digital literacy initiative I spearheaded in Kenya, it's now being piloted by 2 major tech conglomerates. And the rural renewable project in India, it turned profit by Q2. I slid a different folder across the table. Mine. Inside were graphs, agreements, photos from meetings, letters of intent, testimonials, tangible results. Their expressions began to shift. Why haven't we seen any of this? Brian murmured. Because you didn't ask. You never thought to look. I stood again. Lena did too, clipboard still in hand. Your leadership is bloated and outdated, and while you were busy cutting corners and inflating numbers, I was building something lean, something intelligent. You think just because you read some feel-good metrics and visited some poor countries, you can run this company? Daniel sneered. I stepped closer. I don't think it, I know it, and I don't need your permission. Their arrogance was a weakness. They never anticipated that the woman they sidelined could understand balance sheets, that she could talk supply chain logistics or innovate funding models. They didn't know I had been quietly mentored by our CFO before he retired, or that I had taken night courses, or that Lena had a double major in economics and international development. They didn't know anything because they had never bothered to ask. You're making a mistake, my oldest brother said. I'm correcting one, I replied. As Lena and I walked out of the boardroom, I felt something shift inside me. No more begging for space at a table I helped polish. No more dimming brilliance for their comfort. I wasn't a guest. I was the architect, and they were about to find out just how solid my foundation had become. 3 years ago, they gave me what they thought was a consolation prize, the family charity division. To them, it was a sandbox, a quiet corner, a dead end. It suits your personality, Daniel had said, smirking. What they didn't realize was that in the shadows, I had clarity, they had distractions, I had purpose. I took their charity and turned it into a lab, a place to experiment, a safe space to plant seeds. Not just financial investments, but human ones. I found people, brilliant, driven, overlooked people, and gave them space to breathe. The first change was Lena. She was barely 24, fresh out of grad school. Her resume was understated, but I saw something in her eyes. Still, focused, unyielding. She didn't ask for recognition. She asked for raw data. We sat together late nights, combing through old records. We found inefficiencies, outdated contracts, and absurd vendor pricing structures that had gone unchecked for years. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was powerful. We traveled, not for show or photo ops, but to listen. India, Brazil, Kenya. These weren't trips, they were lessons. I remember standing in a rural village outside Pune, watching a solar irrigation system built from scrap, feeding a community of 400 people. That system cost less than my brother's dinner tabs. There was something deeply humbling about realizing how much brilliance the world holds when you actually look. And we looked. Lena and I came back with more than notes. We returned with a vision. We started rebuilding from the inside out. First, we cut ties with overpriced consultants who only delivered jargon. Then we streamlined supply chains, moving to decentralized vendors with direct community impact. We implemented real-time auditing, digitized processes that used to take weeks, launched pilot programs in financial literacy, clean water, and microloans, all tied to scalable outcomes. And we did it without ever asking the board for $1. Because what we were building wasn't a division, it was a prototype. I created shell subsidiaries, registered IP in strategic countries, built exit strategies and redundancies. Lena formed quiet alliances. She had a talent for spotting potential in places most people ignored. She found a fintech coder in Lagos who wrote unbreakable algorithms, a supply chain analyst in Vietnam who cut costs by 40% in his first month. We didn't just diversify revenue, we diversified intellect. By the end of year 1, the charity turned a profit. By the end of year 2, it had outperformed the family's main holdings in net ROI. Still, my brothers laughed. "How's the little nonprofit project going?" they'd ask. And I'd smile, because we had the blueprint now, not just for wealth, but for resilience. We weren't just collecting data. We were creating models, real ones, models that could be replicated across markets and verticals, models that were ethically sound and economically fierce. By the time they noticed, we weren't just a branch, we were a tree. And our roots ran deeper than they could ever dig. The cracks didn't show up all at once. They whispered, small inconsistencies. A board vote that mysteriously failed despite unanimous promises. A transaction logged twice but paid once. I noticed first. Not because I was suspicious, but because I was methodical. Lena flagged a discrepancy in the risk register tied to one of Daniel's offshore holdings. We followed the breadcrumb trail across 4 shell companies. The numbers didn't lie. Money was being moved, but not for reinvestment. It was embezzlement, carefully disguised as rebalancing. At the same time, the family's legacy product line, the crown jewel, was tanking. Sales dropped 19% in Q2. But instead of pivoting, they doubled down with outdated marketing and bloated inventories, all while I watched in silence. I wasn't surprised. My brothers built their empires like they built their egos, wide, flashy, and hollow. Lena asked if we should go to the press. I said no, not yet. Instead, we watched as their foundations began to shake. What they called bad luck, I called math. And so I did what they never expected. I invited them to dinner. All of them. Daniel, Marcus, even our mother. They thought I was trying to mend fences, that I was looking for peace. But peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice. The restaurant was our grandfather's favorite, a place built from brick and stubbornness, like him. My brothers walked in, smug and dismissive. "Charity's paying well these days," Marcus joked, nodding at my Haylard jacket. I let them laugh. Then I handed each of them a portfolio, slim, neat, deadly. Inside, a full audit, timelines, statements, proof of misappropriation, proof of negligence, proof of betrayal. For a moment, the room went quiet. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but I stopped him. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "You just have to listen." I explained what I'd done, how I'd restructured the family trust in silence, how I'd used a clause buried in our grandfather's original estate, one that hadn't been activated since 1987, to call a vote of stewardship. They tried to interrupt. I didn't let them. "You see, while you were protecting your power, I was protecting our name. The trap wasn't the documents, it was the timing. Everything was filed, legal, irrevocable. And the board, they'd already voted. Not in whispers, but with numbers, with returns, with measurable impact. The charity division wasn't a side project anymore. It was the engine. Their faces changed. Rage, then panic, then something worse, realization. For years they dismissed me, now they worked for me. And I didn't need their apology, I needed their silence. After that dinner, everything changed. Officially, I was now executive steward of the family legacy, a title that hadn't been used in decades. But with it came teeth. Marcus tried to rally the shareholders, spinning a narrative of betrayal. But the numbers told a different story. Our quarterly report outperformed projections by 47%. While they scrambled for damage control, I issued statements. Calm, clear, and boringly effective. I didn't need drama. I needed order. And so the restructuring began. Departments were merged, redundant executives were let go, with generous severance and ironclad NDAs. Lena stepped up as Director of Innovation. She never asked for the role. She earned it. We transitioned every contract to performance-based incentives. Dead weight had to go. My brother's cronies, those lifelong yes men, tried to play both sides. But you can't play chess with people who've already flipped the board. The press was relentless. Heiress overthrow? Boardroom coup? I didn't grant interviews. Instead, I made moves. We launched a new initiative, Heritage Forward, a digital archival of our family's economic and cultural contributions, open-sourced for community benefit. Because legacy isn't what you hoard, it's what you build that outlasts you. Daniel came to my office late one night. No security, no entourage, just him. Tired, frayed, unsure. He asked, "Why didn't you just take us down completely?" I looked at him and said, "Because revenge is maintenance, and I don't maintain what I've outgrown." I didn't want their ashes. I wanted our name rebuilt in my image, a legacy that reflected integrity, not intimidation. We made a deal. Daniel and Marcus would step back into ceremonial roles, enough to save face, not enough to sabotage. My mother, well, she remained silent through it all. But she started showing up to the office again, not to interfere, but to watch. And sometimes, quietly, to nod. Lena told me later that people were whispering a new nickname for me, the architect. I smiled, not because they finally saw me, but because I had become undeniable. And that was enough. 6 months later, I stood in front of a crowd at the launch of our first international institute, the Roots Fellowship. It was housed in a building that used to be our shipping headquarters. We repurposed it into a learning incubator, cross-disciplinary, cross-border, and unapologetically inclusive. The irony wasn't lost on me. A place that once moved products now moved ideas. I spoke at the opening ceremony, not with grandeur, but with clarity. What we inherit is not always what we deserve, but what we leave behind must be. Applause erupted, but my eyes searched for Lena, standing in the back, her quiet approval grounding me. We had made something real, something resilient, something that couldn't be taken by force or favor. And still, the real work was just beginning, because legacy isn't about arrival. It's about repetition, consistency, courage. Now I wake up every day without dread, without proving. My name isn't a weapon anymore, it's a promise. The family fortune is no longer hidden behind walls. It's working in schools, labs, farms, startups, and underdog ventures. The brothers, they've adjusted. Daniel writes editorials now. Marcus hosts a podcast about resilient leadership. I smile when I see it trending. Even my mother has changed. She asks for my advice more than she gives hers. Lena was recently profiled in Forbes. She didn't mention me once. That's how I knew I raised her right. This isn't a revenge story. It's a legacy reclaimed. And if you ask how I did it, simple. They tried to bury me, but I was the roots.